Chapter 29. "Take him down!" Dane cried to Pierce, but the Warforged didn't raise his bow. In fact, he didn't move at all. "I'm afraid that this is between you and I, Dane," the twin said, standing up and walking toward him. "Your friends can't help you." Turning to Lay, Dane saw that her body was completely rigid, her face devoid of expression. "What have you done to them?" he said, taking up a guard stance. "It's moaning, actually. I was lying last night. Greykill was right. We like doing that just to confuse people." He seemed unconcerned with Dane's glittering blades, and with a good reason. As Monin approached, Dane made a long lunge with his sword. The blow should have pierced Monin's heart, but the twin moved with astonishing speed, swatting the blade aside with the palm of his left hand. Before Dane could react, Monin grabbed the blade with his left hand and struck at the hilt with his right, knocking it from Dane's grasp. While he was surprised by the changeling's speed, Dane's reflexes were honed by a lifetime of training. Even as he lost his sword, Dane thrust with his dagger. Monin struck the point of the dagger with the palm of his hand, and the blade, which could cut through steel as easily as cheese, came to a dead stop. "You still don't understand, do you?" Monin said. Dane managed to step back before the changeling could grab hold of the dagger. "None of this is really happening. Not physically." "What are you talking about?" Monin smirked, the sadistic smile of a predator toying with his prey. "When you defeated my allies last night, I cast my spirit into your mind. This," he gestured around them, "is a dream and a memory. Even now you're drooling on the cobblestones. In a few moments I'll have disposed of you once and for all. I'll use your body for as long as it suits my needs, and then I'll leave you to rot in some madhouse." "You're lying." "Am I?" Monin reached behind his back, and when his hand came back into view there was a sword in it, one Dane recognized in an instant. "Look what I've found here. Remember this, Dane? A gift from your grandfather. And look what you did to it." It had been a long time since Dane had really stopped to look at his grandfather's sword. The damage to the blade and hilt, both intentional and accidental. He glanced at the blade, and in that moment everything changed. He was in the courtyard of the family estate in Metrol. For a moment, it seemed he was a child again. The walls and doors towered over him. Then he realized that he had not changed. The buildings were simply oversized, scaled to the perceptions of a boy. His grandfather towered over him, tarnished sword in hand. "Look what you've done," he said, his voice filled with disappointment. "I believed in you. I knew you would uphold the legacy of the honor of my blood, and see what you have done with it." "Clever," Dane said, "but I've fought your kind before." He made a quick thrust, dipping beneath the expected parry and darting forward, trying to close the distance between them. But even as he moved forward, his enemy slipped back. It was like trying to hit a ghost. The creature wearing his grandfather's face laughed and raised his family sword. "I've spent all day in your memories, Dane," the changeling said. "I know how you fight, but it hardly matters. You can't kill me with the idea of a sword. At best, you can force me into the shadows for a few more hours." Now it was Monin's turn to go on the offense, and even his movements were those of Dane's grandfather, who had taught Dane the fundamental principles of defense. But this was a mistake. Dailan had been a master swordsman, one of the best in Corvair. Dane remembered those practice sessions as vividly as his last conversation with his father, combining his memories of the past with the skills he had acquired in the intervening years. It was a simple matter to block each blow. "You may be able to hold me off, Monin, but you can't beat me with my own memories," Dane said. He was growing suspicious. Monin seemed surprisingly eager to talk about the situation. The changeling might be telling the truth, but he could just as easily be lying, trying to demoralize his foe. "Perhaps I don't need a win," Monin said. "Perhaps I just need to wait. Every minute you're trapped, my power grows. Soon I'll depart, and I'll take your body with me. But don't worry, you'll have all your memories to keep you company. Soon enough, you'll be no more than a memory yourself." Perhaps Monin was telling the truth, perhaps not, but the taunts were taking a toll on Dane. With every passing moment, he felt more detached, distant. It was becoming difficult to think, but he had to try. He launched a series of lightning-swift blows at the changeling, but his foe didn't parry. He simply avoided. Each warrior knew the other's fighting style perfectly. And then Dane had an idea. He was facing a deadly, highly skilled opponent. He had only one weapon left, and it was both his last defense and his only chance against his enemy. Every lesson he'd been taught, every instinct he had, told him that the dagger was his last hope. He threw it. Monin was preparing for another pass when Dane hurled the dagger. Dane's real grandfather might have been able to block the blade, but Dane had never thrown a weapon in their practice sessions, and he never would have thrown the weapon in real life. In all of Dane's memories, the memories Monin was using against him, there was no precedent for such an act. The blade caught Monin in the center of his throat. He sat down, hard, and the mask of Dane's grandfather slipped away, revealing the almost featureless face of the changeling. His sword fell to the floor and vanished as his hands rose up, trying to grab hold of the hilt of the adamantine blade. But he didn't have the energy, and his hands fell back to the floor. "Only temporary," he whispered, gazing into Dane's eyes. Monin faded away, and the world went with him. Dane woke on one side of the pallets in their room in the Manticore. Lay was sitting by his side, holding a glittering crystal in her hand. "Lay?" he whispered. She looked over at him, and a smile spread over her face. "Dane, thank the sovereigns." "They didn't have anything to do with it," he muttered. "What happened?" His head was muzzy, and he was having to force thoughts through the haze. Pierce's voice came from above and behind him. "You collapsed just outside the Manticore. We brought you inside." "I was searching for outside influences," Lei explained, indicating the crystal in her hand. "But I can't sense anything. Do you remember what happened?" "It's Monin. He's inside my head. I've got to find a way to drive him out, and quickly. If what he said is true, it's only a matter of time before he regains his strength and tries again." Lei frowned. "A priest, then? They say that the adepts of the Silver Flame are masters of exorcism." "No!" Dane shook his head. "No priests. Besides, this isn't a demon or fiend. It's, I don't know. It's memories, thoughts. But I'm not talking to a priest of the flame." Lei shrugged. "Fine. So do you have an idea of your own?" Dane pondered for a moment, then rose to his feet and picked up his sword belt. "Perhaps I do." He buckled on the belt and grabbed his chainmail shirt. "Where's Jode?" "He still hasn't arrived," Pierce said. That stopped him for a moment. "What time is it?" "The 7th bell just rang," they replied. "I'll be back by 10. "Where are you going?" Following a hunch." "And what happens if you faint in the middle of hunch hunting?" "Then I guess Jode won't be the only one missing." They blocked his path. "Dane, you were the one demanding we stay together." "This is different. This is something I need to do alone. Trust me. I'll be back soon." He pushed her aside and threw on his cloak as he walked out the door. Chapter 30. The King of Fire came alive at night, and the common room was considered more crowded than it had been before. The gamblers and revelers packed the burning tables, and it took Dane a few moments to locate the host. He exchanged a few words with the little halfling and slipped one of his few remaining coins into the man's tiny palm. In exchange, he received a wink and directions to a table in the inner hall. On his last trip, Dane had remained in the common room for the whole time, but the gaming hall was the true heart of the King of Fire. The decoration was similar to the outer room, black marble with brass fixtures, dark wood tables that burned with cold fire. 8 massive brass pillars were also enchanted with cold fire, and these spread a flickering light across the entire chamber. Over a dozen long tables were spread throughout the room, and Dane saw a vast array of gambling equipment, cards, dice of all shapes, illusory battlefields, and far more. At the center of the chamber, a score of people were gathered around a circular scrying mirror set into the floor, shouting encouragement to a pair of jousting hippogriffs. As Dane passed the mirror, one of the riders was knocked from his mount, and a roar went through the crowd. For a moment, he seemed to hear Monan's voice, whispering just behind him. "What's your hurry? Why not stop? Watch the games. Enjoy yourself while you still can." The table he was looking for was small and dark, one of the only ones not lit by inner fire. Wrapped in the shadows at the corner of the room, it was currently home to only 2 people, a gnome dealer standing on a small pedestal, and the woman Dane was searching for. She was still wearing her dark cloak, and her body was almost invisible in the deep shadows of the room. But she'd lowered the hood, revealing a flood of inky black hair. Dane walked over to the table. As he approached, the woman turned to look at him. Her green eyes seemed to burn with the reflected light from the room. Her features were unnaturally perfect, her pale skin smooth and unblemished, and the lines of chin, cheek, and nose all in perfect proportion. He'd seen marble statues with more blemishes, yet, as beautiful as she was, there was something alien about such perfection, something inhuman. The barest hint of a smile played across her lips. "We meet again." Her voice was soft and musical, set in such a tone to carry over the tumult. "Well, you bought me a drink last time. The least I can do is return the favor." This time, Dane could have sworn her emerald eyes actually glowed in the shadows of the room. "And a man of courtesy and manners. I sensed it when we first met." "Yes, well, there is only one obstacle to this plan, and that's my complete lack of coin." He shrugged, as with her smile the motion was minimal, almost invisible, yet still intensely expressive. "Among my people, we believe the thought is what matters most." As a matter of fact, I wanted to talk to you about that. The gnome harumphed, tapping his fingers on his cards. The woman indicated the empty seat next to her. Sit, then. Play around. If I had the gold to gamble, my lady, you can be assured I'd first have repaid your hospitality. She set 5 sovereigns and a golden galifar on the table in front of him. Luck has been with me tonight. Indulge my hospitality a little longer. She paused, sizing him up with her smoldering eyes. My name is Lakashtai. Dane shrugged. As you wish, though I must warn you that I've seen little in the way of luck these past few days. He sat. I'm Dane. She extended a hand and he clasped it, bowing briefly from his chair. He accepted the cards the dealer pushed his way. War is not my vocation, but you are wearing the badge of the Syrian army, yes? I've been told that it's time to buy a new cloak. I understand. My people were born in the wake of a terrible war, and we have carried the scars of that conflict for thousands of years. She studied her cards and then set out a foundation of earth. The dealer had revealed a single card, the King of Fire. Dane's luck had held true to form, and his hand was mixed and useless. He set down an earth card of his own. Pardon my asking, but you're Kalashtar, aren't you? She gave the ghost of a nod. Yes, there is no shame in the question. You're the first Kalashtar I've ever met. I'm afraid I know little about your people. The fractional shrug appeared again, the barest shifting of delicate shoulders beneath the flowing cloak. We are raised to hold our secrets. Most of my kindred rarely leave the isolated communities they create for themselves, hiding in the shadows of the great cities. Forgive me for being blunt, but what is it that makes a Kalashtar? You look human to me. He drew 2 cards. I'll trust that was intended as a compliment. She crossed her cards with the Alchemist of Earth and placed another coin on the table. We are human, more or less. What defines the Kalashtar is a matter of mind and soul. It's difficult to explain in few words, but I share my body with a spirit from the region of dreams. As with you and Seer, this spirit has been driven from its home. Now it can only exist by spreading its essence through my soul and those of my sisters. So, you have an extra spirit sharing your mind. It's not that simple. Ashtai is a part of me, but I cannot speak to her directly. She moves within my soul, shaping my thoughts and emotions in subtle ways. Why do you ask? Well, I do have an extra spirit sharing my mind. Uninvited and very unwanted. And if he's telling the truth, he's planning to drive me out of my mind. I was hoping you might have a friend who'd know how to deal with this sort of thing. Lakashtai's lovely eyes widened. A mind wraith? You shouldn't be wasting time. She set down her remaining cards, revealing all 3 dragons. Add it to my credit, Talaran, she said, standing up. She didn't even bother looking at the dealer's cards. Come with me, Dane, quickly, and don't worry about the loss. She nodded at his unrevealed cards. I'm still ahead for the night. Chapter 31. Noise and music filled the air as Leigh and Pierce rose into the heights of Sharn. Leigh studied the other passengers on the lift. After her recent experience with Sergeant Lorak, she was happy not to see any guards, but the other travelers were a colorful lot. 3 drunken men howled with laughter, signs of noble families from the look of their fine clothing. A bard of House Fjarlin toyed with a set of fine pipes. His doublet and breeches were covered with dark weave ribbons, so it seemed as if the night itself clung to him. A bard of House Fjarlan toyed with a set of fine pipes. His doublet and breeches were covered with dark weave ribbons, so it seemed as if the night itself clung to him. A muscular Karn woman wearing leather armor and the scars of many battles kept her back to the railing. She had a great sword strapped to her back and an iron-shod club in one hand, and there was a fresh bruise on her right cheek. Leigh guessed that the woman was returning from a fight in one of the pits. Menthis Towers was the hub of Sharn's entertainment industry. From the brothels and battle pits of the lower ward to the theaters and museums of the highest towers. Staring down the inner tower, Leigh seemed to be looking into a well filled with stars, hundreds of eternal torches glittering on the levels below as revelers traveled from one amusement to another. Leigh had used a simple cosmetic charm to prepare Pierce and herself to mingle with the entire citizens of Sharn. While she was still wearing her armor, the green leather was smooth and polished, and the golden rivets on her jerkin gleamed like jewels. Pierce was buffed to a mirror finish. For all that he was a simple soldier, he looked fit to serve in a king's honor guard. "We should return to High Walls, my lady," Pierce said. "We could continue to search for Hugel or Jode." "We already covered the entire district with Greykill," Leigh replied. "If there was anything to find, we'd have seen it already. Besides, it's getting dark. After what happened last night, I can't say I want to wander around the streets of High Walls on our own. If Dane can follow his hunches, I'm going to follow mine." "You have a plan, then?" "I'm still working on that part," Leigh said. "But don't forget, I'm the one who's been to the city before. I've let my concerns with my house cloud my judgment. I have other friends in Sharn. Acquaintances, at the least. It's time to catch up with a few of them." "As you wish." "Give me your bow. No one's going to attack us in Upper Memphis. And you already stand out, like a troll in the court of Metrol." "My lady, it is unwise to limit our defense options." "Pierce, trust me. You're a Syrian Warforged. It's like Greykill said, walking around with a weapon in your hand, you present a challenge to the guards. It's one thing if you're skulking in the shadows, but that's not what I have in mind." A human might have shrugged or sighed, seeing the futility of further argument. Pierce handed his bow to Leigh, who stowed it away in the depths of her pack. "And the flail." "My lady,
I told you, Pierce. Up here, our best defense is to look harmless." She held out her hand. "As long as you follow my lead, everything will be fine. Don't worry, you'll get it back before we return to the lower wards."
"Very well." He pulled the weapon from its harness and handed it over.
"Thank you. Now, I think the best idea is for you to play the role of a house servant. Remember that pompous-ass Domo at Roundwind? I know it's not what you were designed for, but the war's over, and servants are something the people here understand."
"What about a bodyguard?" Pierce's tone seemed slightly stiff,
and Lei gave him a curious glance. Had she insulted him? Fine, you can be my bodyguard, but I'm still keeping the flail out of sight. It's just a little too, well, blunt for this crowd. Eventually, the lift came to a stop at an open-air district, a network of platforms and bridges bound to the massive central towers. Lei led Pierce off of the lift and onto a quiet street. It was a residential neighborhood, filled with orderly rows of wood and plaster houses. Most of these homes were identical, painted white and trimmed in brown. But here and there, a few trellises were covered with Eldine rainbow ivy, creating living murals of vivid color. They call this area Ivy Towers, Lei said. Many of the students and scholars of Morgrave University make their homes here. The university itself is just around the ring.
And who are we visiting?
A friend of mine, Leyland Callis. We spent a year at Arcanix together. I've never had much luck with augurs, but I'd feel foolish if I didn't at least talk to him. Hopefully, he's still here. And Pierce? I hate to ask, but if there was ever a time to lay on the My Lady, this would be it.
As you wish, my lady. They continued down the quiet street. A patrol of the watch passed by with only the slightest glance at Pierce. A turn of the corner, and they came to a house covered with myriad shades of blue ivy.
This would be his, Lei said. She stepped up to the door, but paused even as her hand went for the bell pull.
What is it, my lady?
There's a note. It's tucked into the door, Lei said, pulling it from the frame. And it's addressed to me.
Cautiously unfolding the paper, she read.
Dearest Lei, I'm sorry that I cannot be here to greet you in person, but I am attending a gathering on Pride of the Storm. I hope that you can join me there. I will tell Lord Dantian to expect you and your companion. Any sky coach can bring you up to the yacht at Dantian's expense. Such arrangements are typical for his gatherings. I hope to see you soon. Yours, Leyland.
Apparently, we are expected, Lei said, handing the note to Pierce. He read it somberly.
Impressive, he said, but I admit to some concern. An augur would need to inquire specifically about you to gain such information, would he not?
Lei shrugged. The Sphinx said that we could be seen from far away. I guess she's not the only one who sensed my arrival.
Hence my concern. May I have my weapons back, my lady?
Please, Pierce, Lei said. We've been invited aboard a Lyrandar Lord's yacht. Even if I gave you the weapons, they'd be confiscated at the door.
So, you intend to accept this invitation? What possible purpose could it serve?
Let's see. First, if Leyland is such a talented diviner, who knows what else he could tell us? At the least, he might be able to track down Jode, or this Raciel.
True, Pierce said.
Second, I don't know how long we'll be in Sharn. As I see it, we could use all the contacts we can get, and this is an excellent opportunity to mingle with a class of people we normally would never see.
Pierce said nothing.
And finally, you're talking to a woman who's been living on gruel and water for 6 months, and army rations before that. You may not eat, but if you think I'm going to pass up a chance to dine with one of the wealthiest men in Sharn, you're mistaken. She grinned. Now let's find a coach.
Memphis was a center of entertainment and nightlife, so they had little trouble catching the attention of a sky coach, a slender vessel apparently designed for gnomes and halflings. Lay was comfortable enough, but Pierce could barely fit in the ship. "Don't worry, lady," the coachman said, an elderly halfling with long gray hair. He spoke with a strong Talentan accent. "I'll take things slowly. Keep the big un from falling." Lay smiled.
My thanks, sir. We are expected at the Pride of the Storm. Do you know of it?
"Eh?" the halfling said, nodding. Lay took that as an affirmative. "Guests of the Lirandar, yes?"
That's correct,
Lay said, wondering if it was true. The Mark of the Storm gave House Lirandar power over wind and water, and the heirs of the house had dominated the shipping trade for centuries. In recent decades, an alliance between Canith, Lirandar, and the gnomish shipwrights of Zilargo had resulted in the creation of the true first skyship. Propelled by the power of bound elemental spirits, these airships had revolutionized trade and transportation and proved to be a powerful weapon of war. But the bound spirits were difficult to control, and only a storm child could command their absolute loyalty. It was unlikely that the Lirandars knew of her excoriate status, but she couldn't lie about it, and she had no idea how the House of Storm would treat an expelled maker. The halfling did not ask for payment. Apparently Leyland was as good as his word. The sky coach rose up to the highest spires of Memphis. They were almost a mile above the ground, and Lay's head swam as she looked down at the world below and tried to pick out the spires of high walls far, far below. Winds whipped at her hair and shoulders, but the coachman was as good as his word and took the ascent slowly. Lay gripped the rails and gritted her teeth, waiting for the ordeal to pass. Moments later, they completed the circuit of the towers, and Lay gasped at the sight that lay before them. The flying ships she had seen before were small transports or weapons platforms like the storm ship they had fought at Keldon Ridge. Pride of the Storm was in an entirely different class. It was a galleon, easily one of the largest ships she had seen on land or air. House Lirandar used the Kraken as its sigil, and the stern of the ship was carved in the shape of a vast kraken. The effect was astonishingly lifelike, as if the great beast was in the process of devouring the ship. The kraken was stained black, while the bow and midships were carved from pure white wood. 4 silver lightning bolts adorned the bow. Most of the kraken's tentacles were carved along the side of the ship, but 4 arched out around, over, and under it, and these wooden beams supported the elemental rings that kept the ship afloat. Where most skyships were supported by a single ring of bound elementals, this vessel had 2, a swirling belt of roiling clouds and a smaller ring of pure fire. Lay guessed that the bound air supported the ship, while the fire elementals provided motive force. Staring into the flames, she wondered just how fast the galleon could move. The sky coach came to a halt over the foredeck of the sky ship. A servant in Lirandar livery approached. "Your name, my lady?" he called out. Curiously, despite the altitude, there was no wind over the deck. Whether it was an aspect of the elemental binding or the power of the ship's captain, the howling wind spared the deck of the Pride.
My name is Lay. I come as a guest of Leyland Talus, and I am accompanied by my servant.
The servant studied a sheaf of parchment, then brought up a small footstool to help her disembark. He extended his hand, a smile on his face. "You are expected, Lady Lay. Welcome to the Pride of the Storm."